How do you know what you know? What do you know? Do you really know? These are all questions that Theory of Knowledge, or TOK, aims at IB students throughout the 2 years of the curriculum. Theory of Knowledge, TOK, or epistemology, is the, and I quote, investigation of what separates justified belief from opinion. Or basically, how do we know the things we know, and do we really know them? So, how is this related to the IB, or the International Baccalaureate? Well, basically what the IB does is that it asks its students to write essays and to create a presentation based around questions like, or prompts like, present knowledge is wholly dependent on past knowledge, which is harder than it seems or sounds when you have to think about it in terms of a philosophy. So that's what this video is about, how to understand it, how to understand TOK or epistemology in terms of the IB, not the whole branch of philosophy. Tomorrow's video is going to be about the essay and the presentation, so make sure to subscribe so you can watch that on this channel tomorrow. But let's get started. Quickly, before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm Emiliano Ruiz. I did the IB from 2018 to 2020. And the only thing that makes me qualified to talk about TOK really is the fact that I did the IB and I got an A in TOK. So yeah, that's basically it. I got top marks for both the essay and the presentation. So trust me on what I'm about to say, and let's get started. So I'm gonna talk about the three different things that you need to know to understand TOK, and then a fourth principle, which is how you tie thing number 2 and thing number 3 together to really understand and develop your TOK way of thinking, so to speak. So the first question, or the first thing we're going to look at, is what really is TOK? So what is TOK really? TOK, or epistemology, is simply speaking the study of knowledge. What is the study of knowledge? How can you study knowledge? What is knowledge? Well, that's basically what TOK is, right? You're trying to study knowledge, whatever that can mean. But fundamentally, it's trying to answer 2 questions. What is knowledge? And how is knowledge acquired? And for an IB student, it's really simple to just get sucked into this rabbit hole of what is knowledge? How do I know? Does anybody know? Is there such a thing as knowing, or just being convinced, or believing, or opinions, or logic, or reasoning? How do I know I know? Can you really know something? Do you know, or are you just convinced you know? And a million other questions that can pop up and can leave your head hurting and everything. So it's important for you to understand TOK that you are able to break it down into 2 areas. And you have areas of knowledge and ways of knowing. And these 2 areas, AOKs, AOKs for areas of knowledge, and WOKs, or WOKs for ways of knowing, are the fundamentals in understanding what TOK is really about. So let's dive into the first one, which is areas of knowledge. So first of all, areas of knowledge are quite simple. There's 8 of them, and they're quite simple because they encompass everything we have knowledge in, so to speak, or we have a way of knowing in. And they're not that hard to understand, just to grasp the magnitude of. And the 8 of them are mathematics, the natural sciences, human sciences, the arts, history, ethics, religious knowledge systems, and indigenous knowledge systems. And as you can probably tell, everything in the world that we know of is covered by these 8 parameters. And of course, there can be some certain overlap, and in the IB there is bound to be some overlap because they love to make it as confusing and as tough on students as possible. So let me give you 2 examples, one long and one short, of the overlap and how it can be problematic. So focusing on the IB, for example, you have a subject like chemistry, which is in the natural sciences, and you might be looking at the history of the atomic model. And you can think, oh, Bohr had it right, then Dalton had it right, then Thomson, then Rutherford, and according to themselves and society at that time, everybody had it right. But retrospectively, we now know nobody had it right, and the atom is really a cloud, etc. But here, there's an overlap between the natural sciences, which is looking at the atom itself, and history, which is looking at if they had it right or not right, and etc. And that's one of the ways they could overlap and make it all more confusing and interesting, is by modeling natural sciences and history, which usually you wouldn't think have a lot in common, but apparently in some cases they do. And a more basic, or at least easier to understand example is religious knowledge systems and ethics. So for example, think the Crusades or the Inquisition or Jihad or anything, and you can see why there's an overlap there in things that happen in history and things that might be right or wrong, ethically speaking. So that's how they overlap. But to really understand areas of knowledge, you have to think about ways of knowing and how do we know certain things, because by themselves, areas of knowledge aren't that important. They're really complementary to ways of knowing. And ways of knowing are quite simple again by themselves. And simply speaking, it's the sources we acquire our knowledge from, or in a more epistemologic way of saying it, it's where we acquire what we think is knowledge. And there's also 8 of them. There's 8 ways of knowing, and it's language, sense perception, emotion, faith, intuition, imagination, and memory. And I can't count, it's not 8, it's 7. There's 7 ways of knowing. And now these are very self-explanatory, right? We all know what language is, or memory, or sense perception, like what you can touch, feel, or smell, etc. Memory, faith, everything is quite self-explanatory. So let me give you an example again on why ways of knowing aren't as straightforward as they might appear. So a simplistic example is you're a baby, or there's a baby, and you see a stove. And you don't know it's hot, so you touch it, and through sense perception, you feel the heat, you get burnt, and now you know it's hot. And next time you see a stove, you might not touch it, because from your memory, you remember that stoves can be hot, and therefore you don't touch it. But how about for things you can't necessarily see or feel? So for example, the debate about whether the earth is flat or round, and there's several ways of knowing where you can actually figure out that the earth is round. An astronaut that has been in space and has seen the earth could say, I know it's round because of my sense perception and I actually saw it, right? Some people might say that it's intuitive because they know about physics and the gravitational pull and the fact that every other planet is round, so the earth can't be any different. And others might say language because that's what they were told and they never questioned it. And these are all valid ways of knowing, and they're all valid conclusions, or they're all reaching the same conclusion in the same topic through different ways of knowing. And they're all valid conclusions. They're all valid ways of arriving to the same conclusion. But there are some cases where some conclusions, or there are some areas of knowledge where some ways of knowing are less or more valid than others. And this ties into the 4th and last piece of the video, which is the most important, so to speak, once that you've understood ways of knowing and areas of knowledge. And it's how to tie these 2 ways of knowing and areas of knowledge together so you can form a clear picture of what epistemology is and what TOK teachers want. So tying in areas of knowledge and ways of knowing is crucial to your understanding of TOK and epistemology, because you can't have, or you need both to make sense of it. So how do you do this? You realize that some areas of knowledge are assigned, unofficially of course, certain ways of knowing. So an example would be religious knowledge systems and faith, right? Or history and language. Considering, I mean, reading a history book or being told history or a legend or something. And that's easy examples, but you have to use your logic to really kind of intuitively know if it makes sense or doesn't. For example, you can't have faith in knowing that gravity doesn't exist, and since you have faith in it, you now know that it doesn't exist. And that's not how it works, right? You have to be logical and think, of course gravity exists, because if I drop something, it falls. Basically, you have to be reasonable enough you have to be analytical in TOK, and you have to be able to put together 2 concepts that are both very abstract, like emotion and ethics, and you have to be able to tie them together in a way that makes sense. And that's what teachers want. Teachers want you to be able to analyze situations or ways of knowing or areas of knowledge and see where its counterpart fits in, so to speak. And this is a really useful skill when it comes to writing the essay, for example, where you're given a prompt, or you're giving 6 prompts that you can choose. And you have to come up with examples of ways of knowing and areas of knowledge. And it's a whole shebang that I'll make another video about tomorrow. But basically, you have to get used to questioning yourself, and to questioning your assumptions, and to questioning whether you know, and why you know, and what you really know, and how you got to know it. It's a lot of questions, and it can be really tedious to be like, oh, I'm so sick of questioning myself because I'm not getting any answers back from myself. But that's what TOK is. You have to be fine, or you have to get used to questioning what you know. And it's hard and it's tedious and it takes a long time, so don't despair. It's fine once you understand it and once you grasp it. What you really have to know is ways of knowing and areas of knowledge, and you have to learn how to interlink those two. So if you're watching today's video hoping for tips on the essay or the presentation, I'm sorry to disappoint. If you want tips on the essay and the presentation, I'm gonna go through mine tomorrow, and then repeat. They both got an A, and it was good. It was great. I felt great about them, and yeah. Cheers, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow.